Okay, good evening, everyone. Hope all is good tonight, and you're all set up for the ProductTank Sofia event, which we have prepared for you tonight. We'll start with a short presentation on what exactly is ProductTank Sofia, which would be quite short, just 5 minutes. And then I'll give the stage to our honorable guest, Anwesha. Her presentation is going to take about 40 minutes, and then we'll proceed with the Q&A session. So feel free to ask any questions in the comments, and we'll take care of them in the end of the presentation. And that's it. So let me first introduce ProductTank Sofia as an organizer. So basically, ProductTank is the biggest community for product managers in the world. It was founded in 2010 in London. Currently, it spans over 200 cities, and you can see the map is quite busy, over 80,000 members in the world. It is basically the go-to place for networking, learning, and resource sharing in digital product management. And ProductTank Sofia was started in 2015. You can see the three organizers, myself, Maria, Didu is my co-founder, and Boris, who joined us a bit later, but he's also part of the team taking active participation in organizing the events. What about the events? Basically, what is ProductTank? The concept is simple. They're free events targeting product managers. The idea is knowledge sharing, basically. You can see on the screen for the past 5 years, we have had very interesting guests and topics from companies like Viber, Skyscanner, Uber, and so on, all interesting ones. Basically, the community outside of events, you can find us online as well. We have a Facebook group which you can follow. We'll show it at the end of this slide deck. It's called ProductTank Sofia Community. Currently, it is about 1,700 people. There is lots of resources sharing there, discussions, and you can also follow us for new events. We try to do them on a monthly basis. You can also follow us on meetup.org, where we announce every new event. And also, you can also follow the global vlog, which Mind the Product, basically ProductTank, the global organization has. The URL is mindtheproduct.com, and where you can see videos not just from ProductTank Sofia, but also from around the whole community around the world. We'll show you on the next slide that you can also follow Mind the Product for live trainings, and you can get more information there. And also, Mind the Product organizes 3 annual conferences with notable speakers like Marty Kagan and so on. One of them is hosted in London, and one of them is hosted in San Francisco. But in today's digital world, they're all online, so it's pretty interesting to follow them. The global resources, as I mentioned, you can find them on the mindtheproduct.com website. And this is our local Facebook page. Like I said, ProductTank Sofia Community is the Facebook group, and the Facebook page which you can follow is ProductTank Sofia. So if you enjoy the event, please like our page or join our group. And now I will present, I'll give the stage to Anwesha, who is the head of Hotel Fintech at Hopper. And she will talk about how you can guide your roadmap through data and tests. Just a short reminder, a quick reminder, make sure to basically ask any questions in the comments. The topic is quite interesting. So if you're working on your roadmap for the next quarter, it's actually very good timing.
Thanks, Maria, for the introduction. And wow, ProductTank Sofia, 1,700 members. That's amazing. And thank you for having us here from Hopper to give the talk this evening. It's our honor. So I've got with me Valio, who's our lead program manager. He's also going to be giving the talk with me. And we'll talk a little bit about, the next 40 minutes, we'll talk about how we build our roadmaps at Hopper and how we use data and tests to do that. So Hopper is a travel company, and we are a mobile app, both a flight marketplace and a hotel, and now a car marketplace. I'm the head of Hotel Fintech at Hopper. I've started my career as a data scientist and then transitioned into product management about 3.5 years ago. Because I was really passionate about, problem solving, and really passionate about taking that data and putting it to good use and actually seeing something come out of it. So that's kind of that's been my career path. Valio, would you like to introduce yourself? I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Valio. I'm lead program manager at Hopper, Hopper Marketplace, which means we're taking care for everything related to travel, and particularly booking a hotel. So we're doing all of this here in Sofia.
Yep. All right. So let's get started. It's going to be a 40-minute talk, but if there's one thing you want to take away from today's talk, is that you don't need to be a data scientist or a data analyst to use data as a product manager. You can actually use strategic data insights in a way that guides your roadmap. All you need is to learn to listen to your data and the story it's telling you, and then applying it to decision making at the right time in the right way. That's the one main takeaway from this talk. And I'm going to walk you through the best way to do that. By the way, if you're posting about this or you want to post some photos on social media, feel free to use hashtag HopperTalksMobile to tag us on it. We always love to see your posts. One thing to remember as we go through this talk is, just like everything else in product management, one size does not fit everyone. So think of this as like a playbook that is adaptable and not so much a rigid manual. There is no one right way to do this. This is just one of the things we've tried and done at Hopper, and we've done it well, and it's worked for us. But it's definitely adaptable. There are different versions of it that different companies use. Treat this as a framework for data-driven decision-making. It's just a guideline of how you could start accounting for data and using data to really fit it into your roadmap. It does change between B2B and B2C organizations. So that's something to remember. If you're in a B2C organization, it is going to be far easier to adapt this roadmap. But if you're in a B2B, your situation, your organization, your stakeholders change. And so the collection of data is very different, and it just needs some adapting. The other thing to keep in mind is your approach will depend on how mature your data organization is. By that, I mean, there are different stages in a data journey for an organization. There are some companies that are legacy companies, which used to have data in very clunky on-premise warehouses. There are others that have moved to cloud, completely cloud only, and all of these, there's a spectrum in between where there are companies that are doing partly on-premise, partly all on cloud. All of them are microservice-based, or there are very few microservices that the company uses. So all of this actually impacts how you can access data and how you can use that data. And having worked in sort of both, it's a different journey. But you can adapt this playbook, even if your company is not data mature. As with anything, in product management, we start with KPIs. Whenever you start, your roadmap, the conversation around road mapping, the first step is, what are the KPIs you're trying to influence over the next quarter, the next half year, the next year? At Hopper, we typically start from a 12 to 18-month goal, and then work backwards from there. So our quarterly roadmap is a chunk of what we want to achieve in that 12 to 18-month goal. So start with KPIs. What are the KPIs and metrics that are a good measure of your product success? It could be a product, it could be a feature, it could be an enhancement, whatever you're building. And an example would be revenue per transaction, which is something we track a lot at Hopper, conversion, lifetime value, what have you. Return on investment, revenue per install, whatever your metric is, right? The next thing to ask yourself, do you know how you can change the inputs to your product and then influence the outcome? What do I mean by that? So if you think of your product as a black box, right? There are certain factors that influence the behavior of users in that black box, and then it leads to the outcome, which is your KPI. So if I'm looking at conversion, some of the inputs, for example, could be how many people enter the funnel to start a hotel booking that end up actually making the hotel booking. So your input would be liquidity, how many people are in the funnel. Another input could be attach, how many people actually enter like the booking flow from a shop, right? So there are different kinds of parameters depending on what you're measuring that become your inputs. And then your outcome is obviously a KPI. So if you can answer the question, I'm going to change my input by X% and see the metric that I'm measuring change by Y%, then you're in a good place, because now you know that you move a lever and you can actually get to an outcome. A lot of times we don't actually have that. Sometimes we don't even know what our inputs are, but even when we do, it's hard to say, if my liquidity goes up by 10%, I'm going to see 10% increase in conversion. Most of the time, it's like, I could increase my liquidity by some amount, and I'm hoping to see an increase in conversion by some amount. So it's not always clear what are the knobs we want to move to impact our outcomes. And that is where you're going to need some data to influence your roadmap, because you actually don't know, as you're building that roadmap, what is my most impactful deliverable going to be? When I say impactful, it means what is that deliverable that is going to move my outcome the most? Because ideally, that is what you would prioritize first. So this is where data-driven decision-making really starts making a difference, right? Before you start gathering that data, there are a few things that you want to do. The first thing you want to do is, what questions do I want my data to answer? What are you looking for? So step one, figure out your inputs. What are the factors that truly impact your KPIs? Step two, prepare a set of questions that you want analytics to answer. Examples could be, how should I price my product to increase conversion? How much should my attach be on the product to break even in 5 months? These are just examples, right? And then step three, what is the expected metric for each answer? Is it a dollar value? Is it a percentage? Is it a progression over time? What have you, right? So you've got this set of things that you want to dig into. You've got a bounded set of questions that you want to look at, which will help you focus how you approach road mapping. Now that you've got those questions, the next step is, what data do we have and where is it? This is really important, because regardless of what organization you're in and how data mature your organization is, you are still going to need to know where the data is sitting. Step one in this process is, what types of data do you have? For example, for us, it could be, I have shopping data, I have booking data. I also have analytics streams of how my users are behaving and interacting with the app. What data warehouses are they stored in? Are they on AWS? Are they on some other cloud platform? Is it a combination of some kind of on-premise warehouse where the data is stored in? And this is important Because I've been in situations in the past, not at Hopper, but before that, where data storage was across multiple platforms. Some data was in Salesforce, some data was on a dashboard somewhere else. And as a product manager, a large part of my time was figuring out where these different data pieces were sitting and how could I bring them into one place so I could actually do some analysis on them. That's actually key, because sometimes it determines whether you can do the job alone or you actually need an analyst or a data scientist to do this for you. So that next part, which is how accessible is this data, is very, very important. Because if it's very accessible and you can just write a query yourself as a product manager, you can quickly pull it up as a dashboard somewhere. It's easy, right? You can get to that data. So all you're accounting for is the time it will take you to get to the data. But a lot of times, that's not the case. So you might actually have to account for time and bandwidth of other resources, like an analyst or a data scientist, who will actually have to be available to pull that data, aggregate it in a way that now you can use it. So this step is actually important, and don't ever skip through it. Obviously, most of the time in B2Cs, this is fairly straightforward because they're stored in a very streamlined fashion, the data. But if you think about B2Bs, especially legacy B2Bs, this is a hard one, because different verticals over time have learned to store their data in different ways that's convenient for their business and use cases. And no one ever thought about centralizing that data store, and then you as a product manager requiring things from different data stores are really struggling to figure out where is the data even sitting. So don't skip this step if you're in one of those organizations that stores data in different ways. And then once you know where it is, figure out if there is a quick way for you to analyze this data. Maybe the insights are already there. They're just not put together in the right way. Maybe they're already there, and all you have to do is pull it and share it with other stakeholders. Or maybe you're going to have to do some analysis yourself to get to the data that you need. So here's where we come to the questions that we had originally formulated, which are the analytics questions you want to answer, or the data questions you want to answer. You want to figure out, how do I get to these answers? I cannot tell you how important it is to start simple. This has tripped me up a lot, right? We always think that the answer is in something complicated and cool, but sometimes it is just a simple SQL query and an Excel pivot table. And those could be your best friend for most questions. You may not have to dig very deep. If you have Google Analytics or any kind of mixed panel analytics, usually there are some answers you can find there. So you could basically start pulling data from these places and seeing if you have the data to answer your question as accurately as possible. If not, could you add in some additional analytics? Maybe it's just a matter of we never track the right things, but users are behaving in a certain way. We already know that. We just need to know how much, like we need a number to that. So let's add in some extra analytics, and sometimes that's easy to do. And you can do that and get to the data. But sometimes simple doesn't actually cut it. And that's where things start spiraling out of control, because now you're like, well, I don't have this data. To get to this data, I might actually have to build something. It's an investment. And I'm just going to go with my hunch at this point. Don't do that. That's an instinct we love to, lean on. Stop yourself and see if there are other companies that have gone through this process or a similar problem they've tried to solve. And how did they get to the data? What was their baseline? Sometimes just looking at how other people might have done this or approached this problem can give you a lot of inspiration and help you find similarities, even if it's in a different industry. Another thing to do is to look at the simple data science black box tools that are available to us today. Whether you're using Python notebooks or you're on AWS, pretty much all of them have now, Python has a lot of support for black box tools. R has a lot of support for black box tools. Excel has a lot of support too, where you can do a simple regression or a logistic regression to figure out the answer you're looking for. There are black box tools for sentiment analysis and segmentation that can also get you the data you need. So depending on how complex your problem is, you may not actually need a data scientist to do this for you if you don't have one. If you do have one, great, lucky you. But a lot of product managers don't, especially if the data scientist is a shared resource and you need something quickly because you're road mapping. It's a good idea to just dabble in this a little bit, especially for complex problems. But most of the time, you won't actually need to dig in too deep into data science black box toolkits. Once you've figured out how to analyze, I like to put this out there because it's very easy to get lost in buzzwords. I hear a lot of people in different companies, from senior executives all the way down to product managers, interchangeably using analytics and machine learning and artificial intelligence, and they're not the same thing. Depending on what you really need, your requirement for data could be very, very simple. Analytics is gathering data on product usage and being able to conduct statistical analysis on them. Machine learning is to be able to scale that same statistical analysis to large volumes of data, automating it and creating a feedback loop so that the algorithm, whatever analysis you're doing, can retrain itself with new data and course correct. Artificial intelligence is something we actually very rarely use in most consumer products. Is when the computer simulates human behavior. It uses machine learning, knowledge graphs, and other techniques, but it's more a cognitive simulation of the human brain. Deep learning is just a type of machine learning that uses neural networks. When you're starting to look at data, don't over-engineer the problem. Start simple. That's the main takeaway of these last 2-3 slides. Start simple, start with SQL, start with Excel pivot tables, start with your analytics stream, see if you can get to the data easily, because most of the data usually is just sitting there for you to mine into it in the right way. If none of that cuts it, then look at more complex solutions. So you've got the data. You know what you're going to do to analyze it. You've figured out how to analyze it. The next step is to visualize your data and storyboard it. This is one of my most fun parts of working with data. Data always tells a story. And it's really funny because you can start with a story you want to tell, and data will find a way to tell you the story you want to tell, even though it might not be the right story. So this is something to look out for. But this is a fun stage. This is the most fun stage, I think, of like road mapping with data, is that you can now take your data and look at the charts and look at the graphs and actually put together a causal relationship of what exactly is happening here. You should be able to, at this point, put together a series of charts that tell a story of why you're seeing a certain user behavior and why you think impacting any one of these steps in the user's journey can affect your outcome. One thing to do here now is remember those questions we put together at the very beginning. Put them on the side, list them out. And now look at the findings that you just have from your data and see, can you answer each of these questions with a number, a percentage, a progression over time? Do you have an answer? There might be some questions that are not answered today. So what do you do with that? You carry them forward. It's important to keep these questions with you. First, take a moment to think about why could you not get to these answers? Maybe the data wasn't there. Maybe the data was there, but you just didn't know how to get to it. Maybe it wasn't stored in the right way, or it's garbage data. It was so corrupted in whatever way, in the way you're measuring it, that it wasn't actually usable. This is important. Know why you couldn't get to the answers. From there, Put together your executive summary, which focuses on the highlights of the findings and what that means for your product. Like I said, this is another crucial step. Sometimes you can make data tell you the story you want it to tell. So stop for a minute and run your analysis by peers or analysts who can actually help you identify gaps in your thinking. Cross-check your computations. Make sure you're actually reading it right, you're measuring the right thing. Sometimes it's also very easy when you see, something weird or interesting to call it, oh, look at this amazing finding. And it's not necessarily a finding. It might just be an error in the way you've computed your analysis. So if you see anomalies, it's a good idea to dig deep and figure out what's the reason for this anomaly, instead of just saying, oh, I found something interesting. Figure out why, and is it truly interesting, or is it just an error? But this is exactly why you want to stop, run this through other people, make sure you're reading this right and you're telling the story right. Then you harden your hypothesis. First off, the questions that you answered already with the data become key deliverables in your roadmap. So let's say I found a 3% increase in liquidity at the top of the funnel helps me increase conversion on bookings at the bottom of the funnel by 10%. This is the most impactful of all of my findings. I'm going to slot that in as a deliverable at the top. Basically, once you have these key deliverables, you know how much impact they're going to create. It's very easy to prioritize it, right? Then you've got a bunch of these unanswered questions, which become your basis for experimentation. How do I A/B test? How do I design a test? Should I do a user test to get some more data on whether this is even an impactful idea or an impactful deliverable? Is this the right segment? Is there an opportunity? And then finally, you want to create a hypothesis for each test. So unanswered questions become your tests, and then you want to put a hypothesis which measures the success of that test, because your data clearly didn't have the answers. And then we come to the part where you're actually balancing your roadmap. A roadmap, typically, at least at Hopper, because we test so frequently and there are so many new ideas we want to test, constantly, it's never just deliverables that we have hard answers for. Our roadmaps typically are a balance of tests we want to run and deliverables we know will have great impact, right? So now you have a hypothesis, and next to every hypothesis, you've got a target metric or a KPI, which measures the success of the test, and a test plan of how you want to test it. All of this together informs your roadmap, so that usually you have a set of deliverables in a quarter that you want to work on, you know what the impact will be, and a set of tests that are balanced in, so you know exactly what you're testing to find the next big set of opportunities. At Hopper, what some of us like to do is we basically stack a deliverable and a test, and a deliverable and a test. And so as in one sprint, we've shipped a test, we let it soak, we collect data on how the test is doing, we build something that we know is going to have a high impact. And then the following sprint, we follow that up with another test. So this basically keeps our backlog of new ideas going. And it allows us to iterate very, very fast, because we now, every single thing we build is based either on a test or hard data that we already had. One thing to remember is, as we're going through this process, it's so important to validate with testing. You had a bunch of assumptions and hypotheses in your roadmap. Did we actually meet them? Were these the right assumptions to make? Every time we gather new data from a new feature or experiment, we actually want to go back to that analysis and see, did something change? And this happens a lot, not just because of things that you've built, but also other products that might be in the same space competing for attention. Maybe there are other suppliers, new inventory, new deals. There is a whole bunch of things that can affect your original hypothesis. So it's important to keep going back and remeasuring those findings and making sure that they still hold. This is particularly true for pre-fit and growth products, which haven't either proven out market fit or they have, and you're trying to scale it, figure out the right positioning, and kind of grow them, right? Always question your assumptions that were created when you built the hypotheses. Are they still the same? Did any inputs change? Did any inputs get added? Do these inputs still impact the outcome you're trying to achieve? And then finally, based on your findings, update the business case, your roadmap, and your achievable targets. So this is kind of a loop that you're going to keep doing every 3 months. And you want to build your roadmap in a way, usually after 2 quarters, if you've done testing with delivery, you typically have a nice backlog of deliverables that have quantifiable impact because you've already tested them. You know what data you have for them. You know what impact they're going to create. And it's very easy to keep building your roadmap and making it stronger. So it's not hard to do this for just about 2 quarters and get a nice backlog of solid deliverables with quantifiable impact and more ideas to test. So just keep doing this over and over again, right? Basically, find your big impact deliverables, readjust the priorities by customer needs, because that's going to change. The impact might actually be more or less depending on demand, depending on external factors, and use data to explain your changing priorities. This is something that has helped me and other product managers so much, where anytime we say we're choosing to not build something, it's because we found something more impactful, and it wasn't just a hunch, it wasn't just a gut feeling, it was hard data that showed us, you know what, if we built this first, we're actually going to increase our revenues a lot more, or we're going to decrease our costs a lot more. So all of that is really, really important. It's not like you build a roadmap for a year and then you forget about it. There is absolutely no luxury to do that because data is constantly changing, and it will tell you a different story every 3 months, every month. Something's going to change. New product delivery will change the outcome that you're looking for. Having said that, there can be other roadblocks that you might come across. One of the most common ones that I hear is that my data is insufficient. And just like I mentioned before, sometimes organizations are not data mature, or they're on a different path to data maturity. So your data may not be in the condition where you're actually able to use it in the best possible way. Examples would be organizations that are just now learning to be product-led. They were not data-driven before. They're learning to be data-driven. How do they find the data, right? It could also be because you need more data. There's just not sufficient data. And you might actually have to meet with data stakeholders and figure out, how are you managing data? How can we get more data into the data store? Sometimes there can be lengthy conversations because your data team hadn't planned for a large amount of data, and they need to scale up their infrastructure first, which usually needs a lot of time and money and third-party partnerships, and it can get really difficult. So it takes time. One thing that has helped me in the past is if I treat myself as the customer for a data team, and building out small deliverables and saying, hey, I need this thing. I'm your stakeholder. Can you build this for me? This is the impact you will get indirectly if you build this for me. So that's another way to tackle the I need more data problem. Data quality is another thing that a lot of different companies, we all struggle with it across the board. There is no perfect 100% data quality at any company. But it's so important because anytime you use garbage data in your analysis, you're going to get garbage output, and it's going to misguide you. So it's really important to have a good grasp on data governance and how you're maintaining that data. And then sometimes none of this is going to work, and you're going to have to get very, very scrappy with finding proxy data. A lot of times user testing can replace hard data. It's a good start. At other times, you can find creative ways of hacking through multiple warehouses and getting to different kinds of data. And then finally, if you really want to make your organization data-driven, Be the champion for data. Evangelize data. Prove with actions why having data can be so cost effective in the long run, right? Take a small use case, prove it out. As with anything, like build out something, say, I used this data that we had, and I was able to build something meaningful. If we only had more data, I could do so much more with it, right? So that's something that, it's a long-term thing. It's very frustrating when you don't have data and you want to be a data-driven product manager. And it's not easy, and it's not something you can fix in a day. It takes time. And you're going to need allies if you're in one of those organizations where data is insufficient, or you don't have visibility into data, or it's gated to certain roles, right? So it's important to know the difference between your allies and what they do. There's data engineers who are responsible for building out the pipeline for data. How does data get from whatever platform the user is using to wherever you're storing it? Data scientists are people who actually build predictive analytics on data. So they're able to take data out of the data store, aggregate it, clean it up in a way that they need to, and then they're able to prepare their predictive analytic models on them. A data analyst is someone who's able to take the data and quickly visualize trends and directionals in, overall, these are the user trends I'm seeing, or this is how users are behaving. So there is a difference in these roles, and you might need to lean on one or more of them if you want to take your organization to data maturity. As a product manager, if you're in an organization where data is very protected and gated within certain organizations and not in the product development organization, you can still become a champion for their cause. Ultimately, you need the data, so it's a good idea to find your allies in the data engineering, data science, and the data analyst teams and figuring out what do you need so that you can get me the analysis I want, and actually championing that, right? And then finally, if there is no clear visibility in your organization to who owns data in your business vertical, in the company, depending on how big your company is, what is the plan? How do they plan on storing, collecting, maintaining data? If there is no plan, can someone, can you bring that up with a senior level executive, a leader, and say, can we build out data maturity within our organization? Can we build out a 5-year plan? Can we build out a 3-year plan? How do we get to data cleanliness and accessible data so we can actually use it for product development? And last but not the least, not all decisions need data. This is something important to remember because a lot of companies do yearly planning and it's purely functional or operational because it's an internal stakeholder team. And as a product manager, what you're really doing is looking at what your internal team needs, and it's just a list of priorities that they have because that's what they need. They're doing it, outside of your team. You're only responsible for delivery. If that is the case, you can use some data. You will most likely need some, but you won't need a lot. And like I said, being data-driven in an organization that is not data mature is very frustrating. Being data-driven in an organization where senior leadership doesn't recognize how important data is also equally frustrating. Be patient, find a champion if you can, and really start slow. Pick some data, see if you can use it, see if you can demonstrate the benefit of it. If it actually helps you in conversations, cost-benefit analyses, and putting together business cases, and presenting that to stakeholders. And I can promise you, usually that's a good place to start to encourage and evangelize people into getting on that bandwagon of let's start using data to make decisions. With that, I did want to end with a little bit on Hopper and how, as a travel company, we've tackled COVID, because this last year has been out of the box in terms of, how years go, and all of our plans kind of got thrown and tossed out, and we had to rethink and reimagine how travel would look at a time when people were scared to travel and there were travel bans all around and so many restrictions and quarantine rules. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to walk everyone through how we've done at a time when travel has overall seen a massive decrease in demand. We actually came out of 2020 with 109% increase in our year-over revenue growth, which is enormous for a travel company. We're the only company that closed out Q3 with a positive increase in year-over-year revenue. And as you can see, most of our competitors, including big companies like Expedia and Airbnb and Booking.com, actually didn't do that well for most of 2020. And the reason we were able to do this is because we started diversifying our product mix from pure travel, transactional travel, which is you're going to go and shop and book a stay, a flight, or a car rental, to fintech products. So if you see here, we started out in like January of 2019 selling 98%, our product mix was 98% air. We were like, most of our revenue was coming from air sales. As we go into 2020, you're going to start seeing how much air bookings with ancillaries like cancel for any reason protection, change disruption protection, all kinds of different third-party protections, as well as internal fintech protections, have increased in market share, and they accounted for 36% in December 2020, 36% of our overall revenue. Hotels grew a lot in 2019 and continued to grow in 2020, even though we did see a slight decrease here towards the end, but hotels recovered. We are now today, almost at the end of Q1 2021, we've surpassed where we were last year in February. So we've been growing on the hotel side. And then Price Freeze, which is another fintech product, basically where you lock your fare and you can buy the stay or the flight later at that same locked price. That grew as well, and that accounts, now for almost 19 to 20% of our revenue. So it's really phenomenal how air bookings, which were our primary source of revenue 2 years ago, now account for less than 30% of our total revenues. This is how we've managed to pivot and grow over the last year, despite seeing a decrease in travel demand. And we're hiring. We're looking for a lot of talented people. There are product management jobs open. There are engineering roles open. And Valio is going to talk a little bit about our engineering team that we're building out in Sofia.
Hello again. Yeah, as Anwesha mentioned, we're building the most customer-centric travel company on Earth. We want to help everyone to discover the planet and to have the ability to travel cheaper and easy. So we're looking for engineers, not only engineers actually, but we're looking for talented people to join our team here in Sofia. We're focused on building the backbone for hotels. That means also we're paving the way Hopper to build a new product in that space in near future. How we work in Hopper, that's something very important. We have a different lanes, and each lane acting as a small company, like a small startup. So you own your space, you work on what you commit, and you are active part of planning your roadmap for each quarter. Adjusting roadmap, planning your roadmap, and in the end, delivering what you promise. So saying all that, whoever wants to join us, please come help us. We promise a really exciting journey, and you can be a part of a company that in a couple of years will be probably bigger than at least at the same level as Booking and Airbnb. We promise that for sure.
Cool, thanks guys. I think now it's time to open the stage for questions. There's quite a few in the comments section.
Yeah.
However, I think I'll start being the organizer. I'll take the privilege to ask the first question. So first of all, very interesting topic. Thanks very much for the overview. Very comprehensive. If someone is just about to start educating themselves on the topic, are there any sources, books that you would recommend? I guess it involves a lot of things, some statistical analysis, knowledge on how to set up hypotheses, data manipulation, and so on. Do you have any favorite books or sources that you can recommend?
That's a great question. I have to think back to all of the things that have formed this knowledge base, but I think a good place to start is always Medium has a bunch of different blogs and guides, and a lot of people have gone through this journey. I usually lean back a lot on Medium, but there are also other books that you can read that are more in-depth in actual tooling. So if you really want to go into statistical analysis, or Python or R, there are obviously like a whole bunch of books, and I can definitely share that with you, Maria, and you can maybe send it out to the participant list. I've also taken courses on Coursera sometimes, or Udemy, because if I want to focus on a very specific thing, like how do I build regression, what different types of regressions are there, usually a quick crash course is a good idea because they walk you through the different types of regression and when to use them. There's obviously vast literature, which I don't think is necessary for product managers. I think it's really about how to know which technique to apply when. And that's, I think, between Medium and any courses, if you really want to go a little bit deeper and do the analysis yourself. There's also, AWS has guides. There's a lot of guides out there on how to use the different Python toolkits. Python has a lot of good black boxes that you can just use out of the box. It just needs, you just need to know what to give it as input. I think where I think if you start getting into deep analysis, that it's going to trip you up a little. And maybe that's where the reading needs to be focused on, is cleaning up the data. Data is not clean. It's rarely ever clean. If it's something you're consuming out of like a dashboard or like, amplitude or an analytics panel, it's what it is, right? It's not unclean in the sense it's not garbage data, but it's always possible that it wasn't set up the right way. That's one way of thinking about it. But when I mean unclean data, I literally mean missing data, or like a text field that has numbers in it and you can't really do anything with it, or a numbers field that has text in it and it's going to trip up your analysis because you're going to feed that column into your little toolkit of like regression, and it's going to just say, oops, I don't know what to do with this, I can't process it, right? And those are things that you need to look out for. And it's a whole, like, there's like a number of things you can do. There are steps that you can follow on cleaning data, aggregating data. There is feature reduction, which is when you have 26 different parameters influencing your model and you're like, that's just bad. None of them is statistically significant. It's an intuition over time that you'll develop to say, I think not all of these are important. I'm going to hone into the ones I think are important. You can find a lot of literature around that too. So I think, to answer your question, there's a vast number of resources, and I don't know if I want to pinpoint one book or one course. But when you're looking for resources, look for resources around these topics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And we would appreciate a list after that.
Yes, absolutely. I will send it to you for sure.
Okay, cool. Another question before I give the stage to the audience. When you're building maybe we can talk about Hopper in particular. When you're building a new feature, do you already have an established framework where you already, automatically collect analytics data that you need for this new feature to be analyzed later, or do you have to do anything specific in advance to think about what exactly are you going to measure, and maybe also work with the engineering team to build something special for that purpose?
Great question. So we have a framework where we have a way to add in analytics into the code on the back end and the front end with user interaction. And then push it into Amplitude, which is where we build our dashboards on the business side, right? Having said that, a significant portion of the work I do before I actually take a feature to grooming is I actually sit down and think about, if this is the test, what am I measuring? What is the success benchmark? How can I measure it? Do I have all the analytics in place already? Or do I need my team to add something? I think in everything that I've built at Hopper so far, I have always had to add something to the analytics stream. And what I usually do is, once that document is ready, I call it the analytics and tracking specs. I usually put together a document, and that's our source of truth. And I have my engineering team review it. That is not to say this is a foolproof process. So the infrastructure being there doesn't always mean it's, you're going to think of this right at the start. We have had situations in the past where either it didn't make it into the code in the right way, or we were measuring something wrong. That can always happen, but it's a good start to at least know what you're measuring up front, and making sure the analytics is there, or to add it in as part of the build.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Another question from the audience. Can you recommend some tools to help the data analysis if we don't have a data scientist around? I think you mentioned a few, but maybe iterate on that.
Absolutely. So I usually like to, I use BigQuery a lot because that's where we store our data. So SQL, just writing SQL queries. Sometimes I use, I download that data and put it into Excel and run a pivot table analysis, run a linear regression. The key there, I think that the real work there isn't so much in creating the regression or the pivot table analysis. It's actually aggregating the data in the right way. How many columns do I need? In what format do I need them? How granular do I need it? Another thing I've used in the past that used to be pretty quick is R. Although I think if you have an analytics stream, you don't really need that. And if you have if you're not getting into super complicated modeling like clustering or segmentation, you typically won't need that. Regressions pretty much come out of the box with Excel now. Because that's easy to do. Data visualization tools, I like to use the in-house that comes with, Google Sheets and BigQuery. Like, they have an integration with just charts, but Tableau is good. I've used that in the past. Amplitude is something we use internally a lot to build our dashboards, because that's our analytics stream, which really informs user behavior and what we're going to build next. So those are all different data visualization tools. I know a lot of people like Power BI and a bunch of other visualization tools. So in terms of that definitely helps. With data analysis, if you don't have a data scientist around, I would also recommend that you get access to a Jupyter server. It's easy to get access to. If your company doesn't have access to it, you can actually spin up an instance on AWS yourself with a personal account. Jupyter is one of my most favorite starter tools. You don't have to understand data science. It's very simple to just follow instructions and say, you will get so much open source help around how to create a model for regression, for logistic regression, how to clean up your data, what is a chi-test and an f-test. And it's very easy to just use those if you need complicated data analysis. If you don't, you probably won't need Jupyter, and Excel will do the job. I hope that answers the question.
Cool, pretty much. All right, another one. Do you have any creative ideas on how to collect data from pure on-premise products?
Yes, that's an amazing question. I have worked in the past before where some of our booking data used to sit on Teradata. Our shopping data used to be half in Impala, in an Impala database on an on-premise cloud, and the other half would be in Parquet, and it was just very hard to parse it. And then we would have some data sitting in Splunk, and it's some data that's just not sitting anywhere, like no one's collecting it. And and I think what I got really used to is knowing who is managing the data so I can get access to it. step one. Step two, what is one place which has the capacity to accumulate all of that data? Because sometimes it's not your laptop. Your laptop will die if you start getting like gigabytes of data onto it and start trying to do joins. I've also done in the past, when it's really hard to join data, because sometimes you need aggregates, right? I would actually use Tableau to just pull in and connect directly to data sources. So you could have, you can connect to multiple data sources in Tableau. And I think through all visualization tools. And I would actually then do my analysis in Tableau there. Another creative thing to do, and this is usually good enough if you're looking for directional guidance on what is my data telling me, start with a small sample of data. 1 day worth of booking data, 1 day worth of shopping data, or 3 days of shopping data. If you want to measure something as simple as conversion, for example, and you want to join them because they're in 2 different data sources, pull them into your laptop. It is easy to do that. Or upload them to a cloud query service. We used to have Hive. I would just create those tables in Hive in my own repository, which would always run out of memory eventually, but you can at least, iterate and keep an aggregate data set, work through your analysis on a small amount of data, get to your findings and say, okay, I now want to productionize this, someone help me. It takes more time, but it at least guides you initially on some good solid numbers on a small data set that will help you make your case for whatever you're trying to prove or build your roadmap.
Cool, thanks. Next question. What are the main must-haves in a data research repository?
Oh, this one I haven't thought about in a long time. Let me see. First of all, a definition guide of what is stored. This is a big one because I've always run into an issue of what are my data sources and where are we storing them and what do they mean? Because nomenclature kind of gets decided by whoever is building it, and then no one really remembers or the person has left. A data dictionary is so important. It's something that's maintained, so not something that was built once and then forgotten about. I think a clear set of requirements every time you're building something new in your repository, a clear sandbox area. We create a lot of aggregate data sets when we're analyzing things, and sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're trash, but the whole world doesn't need to see all of them. Allowing for a sandbox is really, really helpful because then product managers and less data literate people, your CEOs, and all of the other executives who don't work with data every day can also go in and access like visualizations off of those data sets. So it's really important to figure out who your audience is in terms of data usage and make sure that you're creating areas of work for them within those repositories. For example, you could have one purely for finance and you only have data sets there that are for finance, right? So that's another thing. I think data repositories evolve a lot with requirements of what you're wanting to store, what you're wanting to track as you become more mature. As if it's a really big organization, having some form of data governance on what you can store, what format to store it in is important. I think having a consistent way of storing data as you're growing is very, very important. So your data repository cannot just be ad hoc. There has to be a management principle around it. If it's ad hoc, then anyone gets to add whatever data. There are no restrictions on who can access what data. And if you're working with PCI data or like personal information, personal credit cards, that is just, if you're already probably familiar with GDPR rules, so you know that you can't actually just add those ad hoc. I think another key for a research repository, particularly, is connectivity and ETL pipelines. I think I've seen a lot of companies struggle where they'll dump everything in an Avro format, and it's just a data dump, but it's so hard to do analysis on it because the parsing takes days. Like I remember, even 1 day's worth of data would take 3 days to unnest and get into the shape you want to start your analysis in, and it's very frustrating. So in a research repository, it's so important to be able to say, can we get snapshots? We don't want everything, but can we get snapshots of critical data sets that our analysts, our data scientists, or product managers need, so that we can make this a scheduled job, an ETL job, and we're just going to keep X number of days of data. We know like transactional data can become huge, but keep it limited to 30 days of data in this format, and we're just going to keep, it's a job. So every day you'll see a rolling window of 30 days that it's easy to do analysis on, and you're not struggling with latency or waiting around to get the data in the right format.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Isn't there a limit to testing? Actually, I wanted to ask you, is your roadmap entirely driven this way, or what percentage of it do you drive it this way?
At Hopper, I would say 50% of my roadmap every quarter is testing. And the reason it is that way, I think it depends. For us, it's about finding new opportunities. So in fintech particularly, because it's something we've started less than a year ago on the hotel side, it's a lot of what we do is figuring out what is my next big opportunity. Am I missing an opportunity? But also think about something as simple as a copy change on an app, right? I want to change the wording. How are my users going to receive it? For me, that's a test. I'm not going to just make a decision on behalf of the user. Should I build an additional functionality or feature inside of a product funnel? That's not a decision I'm going to make. I think I know what my customer wants, but do I really know it until the customer gives me a signal? So it's a really good, that's the way we approach it, is constantly test. So we ship a whole bunch of things in a year, and some of them are material, some of them are not, but we know very quickly which ideas have a lot of potential.
And what volumes do you actually test on? We never mentioned how big is the Hopper customer base.
Yeah, so we actually usually test on a subsection of our users in the app. So if you think about hotels, we're about 1.5 million monthly active users. So if we're testing on even 10% of them, we're getting a good signal for a 2-week time period that's statistically significant, and we can actually get to conclusions about whether, honestly, sometimes in Hopper, we even test things on a very small number of people where the feature itself isn't working. It's a proxy feature where you tap on it and it says, oops, sorry, this feature is not available, but it actually helps us understand how many users care about this product, that they actually care to tap on it. So as at Hopper, I think there isn't a limit to testing if you're thinking about a pre-fit product or a growth product. Once you hit maturity, which at Hopper, I don't think we're there with much of our products, except for maybe the original prediction on flights, which is now kind of, it's in maintenance mode. We know how to do it. We've done it well. It works. Until you hit that point where you're actually ready to just coast through on maintenance, I'd say there is no limit to testing.
How do you know you've hit that point?
When you're not finding any more levers to implement, right? So if you think about inputs and outputs, if you can move your attach, let's say if your attach on something is 80% and that's your ceiling, no one else is, like no matter what you've done, you've maybe tried 2-3 different tests and there is no impact on your outcome. You've hit a ceiling. Same thing with, protection products. Sometimes you realize this is it. This is my window of opportunity and I've exhausted it. But until you hit that saturation, and you will know, because if you fail on 2 tests, 3 tests that you had a gut feeling were going to be impactful and they made 0 difference, you're probably at that point where you either there is something there where the customers that were interested in that product are there, they're in the funnel. And without new paid acquisition, you're not going to get more people in the funnel. Even if you did, there is no way to improve your product. So it's going to be like sort of the linear, I get more people in the funnel, it'll be a linear increase in the number of people that attach. Then you know that it's time to call it a mature product and there is nothing you can do about it.
Right. And while we're on the topic, you mentioned quite a big sample of users to test with. Do you have any recommendations for B2B companies where sometimes you have like 100 customers? How can you be data driven there?
That's a great question. One thing so user testing, before I even go into anything else, user testing is your best friend with B2B companies. If you can find people that are willing to get some of their employees to test out a prototype for you, talk out loud with a UX researcher, walk you through, you can actually measure a lot of design metrics and experience metrics in the process. So this is something we used to do at my previous job, where how much time did they spend looking at this? If I split my users into two different groups and I show one of them a single prototype, show the others a control prototype. Mm-hmm. What is the difference in their behavior? How much time did they take to make a decision? They're good proxies to guide you down the right path for the product development. Another way I think B2B companies do a really good job of it is beta testing, signing up with some beta partners and saying, I think there's two ways of doing it. There is the right way of doing it and the wrong way of doing it. This is one of those places where there is a wrong way of doing it. The wrong way of doing it is to build something for 18 months and then getting a beta partner. The right way of doing it is, I've got a product idea. I've got 10 customers that have told me they care about it, which is what led to this whole conversation. Out of those 10, can I get 5 to sign up for a significant amount of the time for certain incentives they get with first launch, right? And then you say, with these customers, as I build a small feature and I ship it, can you help me test it? Does this work for you? Sometimes, I've worked in the API space before, where you can basically say, I'm going to ship a part of the API. Can you take some time to read the documentation with me? Like, I'm going to ask you, can you find X? And the person who's doing the testing with me will say, I actually can't find it. And oops, the documentation is crap. They didn't get it, and they can't tell, right? Like that my API response is sending something that's meaningful for them. So you can get creative with that. I think if it's a dashboard or a platform they're actively using, like a user interface, it gets a lot easier because they can talk out loud. So any new little feature you ship, you can have like a testing series asynchronously even. You can measure how they're doing on that platform because it's easy to assign user IDs to testers. But I think there's definitely a set of different techniques for sure. But I think that gives you enough data in the right direction to guide what your next build should focus on. It's hard to do it ahead of time, though. So I think one of the things in B2B would be actually account for time. Don't overcommit and say, I'm going to ship something to all of my customers by X date without accounting for user testing time. And then there is also often, making sure your UX designer is ahead of the curve and ahead of the build so they can schedule these things up front. Regular communication with the customers who've decided to test with you and saying, this is what we're expecting you to test. Good documentation and instructions on what they're testing and what is expected of them. I think you really need a UX researcher in B2Bs if you want to test actively before build, pre-build, or during build, or to be able to pivot quickly.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, another one, very advanced question. What does your data architecture landscape look like?
Wow. Okay, I am not very, very familiar with the details of it. Maybe Value can answer this a little bit more, but I can definitely answer for as far as like what I can see. We have an analytics data infrastructure, and then we have a data store. At Hopper, we use BigQuery, so Google Cloud Services, and we have basically like all of our data goes into GCP, the Google Cloud Platform. In terms of our user analytics, we also track that in Google Cloud, but at the same time, we also track it through Mixpanel in Amplitude. So we, because it's an app, all of the client interactions are stored in the analytics stream. And then anything else, including transactional data, how many people shopped, how many people booked, how many people were shown something attached, all of that data is stored in Google Cloud. Value, do you think there's anything you want to add to that? Since you're probably closer to this than I am.
I think you cover most of the main part. Also, just in kind of in addition to what Anwesha said, we have a Datadog, and we use the data from Datadog just to extend the analytics. Datadog is more engineering focused, but that gives also enough signals for even for some SOI, how some part of the product performs. So we get the data from Datadog, and we mix with what we have in other analytics platforms.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Cool. While you're here, the next question is, do you consider candidates without engineering experience for product management?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's great to have product. I think what we really look for in product managers is the ability to, instead of always going on instinct, leaning on data to make their decisions, we test for problem-solving skills. We are looking for smart creatives, people who are not afraid to break things down to the fundamentals and question everything. And it doesn't, you don't need to have an engineering background to be a product manager at Hopper.
Okay, cool. And there is one comment, vanity metrics versus the metrics that matter. Do you have any comment on this?
Yes, this is such a good point. Thank you, Pooja, for bringing it up. There are a lot of metrics we track which we think make a difference, and I think that's a trap that's very easy to fall into. But metrics, you know, like I said, data can tell a story that you want it to tell, even though it's not meaningful. And I think that's something we should always be checking for. An example at Hopper would be, we focus a lot, it's not a vanity metric. We care about revenue, right? But sometimes you also need to look at the cost to truly gauge the success of a product. It's not just the cost of build, it's the cost of support, the cost of maintaining that product. Like, is it really worth it? Are we actually, helping our customers down the full journey? Or are we just done after selling and being like, oh, we made a lot of money, but they're really upset about the product they bought, right? So there's definitely a wide spectrum of metrics that you could track. There's a difference between design metrics and business metrics. I think sometimes it's very easy for us to fall into the trap of, if X number of people tapped on this, badge or tapped on the screen, that it means something more. But I think it's important to measure engagement and design metrics, but that's a separate set of metrics than business metrics. So it's important for us as product managers and designers to actually keep track of both. Sometimes I have actually seen this and had this conversation with designers where it's like, I get it, users are engaging more with one design over the other, but ultimately the conversion impact on both variants is negligible. Like, both of them are performing the same. Or sometimes the one that didn't have the best engagement still ended up converting more people. So you had more people at the top of the funnel, but the ultimate number of people that ended up converting was, still proportionally bigger or the same. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the design metric is more powerful. The business metric does end up mattering more. So definitely a good point there.
Okay, cool. What's your key business metric, so to speak, at Hopper?
There are a lot. There's obviously conversion, revenue per transaction, and our gross margin.
Okay.
Those would be our top three, at least on my end for FinTech.
Right. And how many tests do you conduct per month, just to get it?
At Hopper or just within my team?
I don't know. You can say both.
I don't actually know at the Hopper level, but I do know in our team, in 2020, we shipped 29 things, including tests and features. And of those, half of those were tests.
Okay.
So roughly 50% for our team is tests. I think looking at 2021, we might see less than 50% in tests because we actually have, like I said, we have a good backlog now from the tests we ran last year, a good backlog of deliverables that will take us time to build, and we actually know what the impact is. So it'll probably be a little less this year, but definitely as we start looking at new product ideas, that's going to go up again. So it kind of really depends on where we are in the product lifecycle.
Right. Okay. Another question. Wouldn't product analytics guide some of those changes, or testing is still necessary even through that route?
Product analytics is great if you're trying to make changes in an existing product. If you're trying to identify new product opportunities, product analytics may not be the complete story. Let me give you an example. When we launched Price Freeze on hotels, Air had already launched it. It was a fair lock. It was, there is a huge value prop on Air. There is so much uncertainty in booking air travel. People don't know, should I, is $300 good for this particular itinerary? Should I just freeze it because that's my budget? And so we're thinking about it on the hotel side. And it was okay to look at, existing analytics on the air side that told us it was successful, that told us how the users were behaving, that kind of helped us shortcut through some of the tests we wanted to do, because we knew some things would work and some things wouldn't, based on just general user experience with the product on the air side. But then we started thinking about, okay, if we wanted to ship something quickly, what exactly do hotel bookers need in terms of price freeze? Is it really that important? So we started with a test where we said we're going to let the user freeze it for 120 days, 4 months, because hotel prices are not as volatile. Maybe that's the right thing. We ran it for 3 weeks and realized, actually we ran it for about 2 months, 8 weeks. And then we realized most of our users who had frozen for more than 60 days still ended up booking that stay within the first 60 days. And that's when we were like, okay, that's product analytics telling us we don't actually need to let them take on the risk for 4 months. We can reduce our risk window to 2 months. And that's what we did. So I think you still need to run some tests because the data may not just be there, especially if you're building a new product.
Cool. I think these are all questions from the audience. There were some comments, otherwise others you already answered. So I think maybe last question from me. Can you give an example of an interesting finding on opportunity that you discovered by looking at the data?
Yes. So we are currently running a test for price freeze where originally we were offering price freeze on, you tap on a hotel, you select a hotel, and you see the cover page of the hotel, the picture, the details, and that's where we were offering price freeze. And then we started thinking about, so the assumption we were going off of there is most of our customers are value conscious. They only care about the cheapest rate in a hotel. So we let them freeze that. And once we launched that, customer support started getting a bunch of questions around, hey, I froze this assigned at check-in room, but I actually can I upgrade to the king room? And that told us, as the volume of those requests increased, we realized people actually care about the room type. It's not just the price, it's a combination of price and product, right? So we said, why don't we run a test on our room selection screen where we allow them to freeze the price? And my designer came back with 2 designs. He said, one design is consistent with the previous screen where you see the price freeze option on the footer. So you scroll through the screen, you still see price freeze option on the footer. The price on that changes depending on the room you select. The other option was, as you select a room, you see a corresponding price freeze option. And instinctively, everyone said, why are we even bothering to test the second variant? Let's just test the first one, because people are used to this. They are used to seeing the call to action on the footer. That's going to be our biggest attach, but okay, if you want to really try out both, let's try out both. Okay, let's do that. Surprisingly, the attach is actually way more when it's contextualized than when it's on the footer. And this is despite the fact that we actually think a lot of people tap on the call to action on the footer just by fat fingering. It's right next to continue. So there's a high likelihood that you meant to tap continue, but you tap price freeze. Even accounting for that, we saw a higher attach when it was right under a room type and not with the footer. So that's the variant we're going to move forward with. That was very counterintuitive to pretty much everyone who started working on this.
Okay, cool. Okay, last question real quick because we're out of time. So are you including COVID-19 testing in the ancillary product category?
That is an amazing product idea. You want to come join our product team? No, at the moment we are not. We have COVID coverage on insurance that we're selling. So if someone has to cancel their trip because they got COVID or someone in their family did, yes. But I think we are not actually including, and we do have on the flight side guidelines on COVID testing requirements for flying, but we didn't actually add in COVID testing as we haven't partnered up with a COVID testing site at the moment and offering that as an ancillary. But that is a great idea. So I will take that back. Okay.
He or she says that they have applied already. So
nice.
All right. Cool. This is a nice ending for the evening. So thank you very much both for the participation. It was quite interesting, and I hope our audience also enjoyed it. So have a nice evening, and we'll keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. It was an absolute pleasure. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.